so that we can record them as 2 separate days. Okay. Kum Len and Ablat Gemara. We are doing today the first day Yom Tov's blot of Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, and we are up to the Gemara here, the 2 dots. Okay, Rocky. The last thing we learned of Chaf Amud Beis was it says in the pasuk that you can do activities lachem for yourself on Yom Tov. So we said lachem, v'loy lekusi, to yourself and not to a goy, and lachem v'loy leklavim, to you and not for your animals. You cannot cook for your animals or anything like that.
That's the Gemara now will mute themselves.
Okay, the Gemara now will discuss that. Says the Gemara, if you ask the question of Avya Sover, of Avya, the old one, the old Zaken, asked Rav Huna the following question. A behema, there were 2 partners to an animal. Chetzia shel Nochri and the Chetzia shel Yisrael. Half belonged to a Yid and half belonged to a Goy. And the question is, Mahu l'sheichta b'Shabbos? Can you, b'Yom Tov? Can you shech that on Yom Tov? Because you said before you're not allowed to shecht. You're not allowed to shecht an animal for a Goy. And here you are shechting an animal. A part of the animal belongs to a Goy. Can you or can't you? We're in Chaf Aleph, about 8 lines at the top of the page. Says the Gemara, Malay, he said to Mutter, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Malay, he said to him, we're in Chaf Aleph, about 8 lines from the top of the page. So Avi Yisrael said to why is it that you permit shechting an animal where part goes to a goy and part goes to a yid? And we said before, there's one opinion that says, even Hillel holds, you're not allowed to bring voluntary korbanos on Yom Tov because part of it goes to Hashem. Part of it goes to Hashem, part of it goes to me. So why can't I over there also shech the animal? Because part of it going to me. Why is Hashem is forbidden? And if part belongs to God, you can shech. Omalei, Rav Huna was not in the mood of answering, so he told him, Orva Parech. He said to him, why don't you go outside and look at these birds that are flying? He wanted to distract him. Ki Nafik, as if to put down his question. When he went out, Amalei Rabba Berei, Rabba, his son, said to him, Lava Hainu Rab Avi Yisava, this person here who asked you the question was Rab Avi Yisava. Rab Avi, the old man, the Mishtabach Lemar Begavei, you yourself, I heard you, my father, praise the Gavra Rabba, there was a great man. So he asked you a good question, and you basically mocked him. Amalei, Rav Huna said back to him, we had this a few times in more. What do you want me to do? I need to have strength to stand up. I need food to give me strength because I gave drushes today all day and I'm weak and I am emaciated. He asked me a very good question, the boy timer that needs thinking and explaining. And therefore I couldn't. So I just shoot him away. Says the Gemara. So what's the answer? The time of my, what's the difference? Why if a guy is a partner, you're allowed to shech, and if Hashem is a partner, you're not allowed to. So he says as follows: why? Could he have you shech the animal once for the entire animal, even though only part of the animal belongs to Yid, but you can't segregate the two. So therefore, you're allowed to shech the animal. When we do voluntary korbanos on the Mizbeach, even though the Kohen gets, let's say, the chazay and the sheikh, the shank bone and the breast, and the Yisro would get, let's say, majority of the meat, the Mizbeach gets the fats. Also, the shachten b'yom tov, you're not allowed to shech the yom tov. Why not? Because Kohenim ki kazachu mishulchan gavoy kazachu. The way it works is the entire animal really belongs to Hashem. And then Hashem gives you back, in his generosity, he says to the Kohen, you can have the chazay and the sheikh. To the Yisrael, he says, you can have most of the meat. But really, the entire animal belongs to Hashem. That's why we cannot shecht it on korban, on Yom Tov. Which means that, according to those who hold that you could shecht the dar and the davas Yom Tov, they hold that the part that goes to the Kohen and the part that goes to the Yisrael does not come from Hashem from the beginning. Part of the animal goes to Hashem, and part of the animal goes to Yisrael, and that's why you are permitted to shech. Says the Gemara, says, half of it belongs to Goy, and half of it belongs to Yisrael. So we say right now, you're allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov. Why? The same reason we just said before. The efshel kazai is basar. It's impossible to have a kazai is a meat below shechit without shechting, and you cannot separate the two. So therefore, even though half it belongs to goy, no problem. What about isa dough? A piece of dough. Chetzia shel nochi v'chetzia shel Yisrael. Partnership between a yid and a goy. Also la'afoyse b'Yom Tov. You cannot bake the entire bread on Yom Tov, dough on Yom Tov, because why can't you divide it? Give the guy his section, his part, and don't bake that, and only the part that belongs to the yid you can bake, because it's obvious. Mosiv Rav Chana bar Chaneloi. So Chana bar Chaneloi asked the question. It says Isas klovim, dough that was mainly set aside to feed your animals, but if it's also edible for the shepherds, if the shepherds can also eat from it, it's treated like normal bread fit for human consumption. You have to give challah. You can use it for your erev chatzeres when you want to combine different courtyards. If you have a main street, a mavli, then the different chatzeres that come off joined together, and they use this bread as the common, the donation everybody gives. You make a bracha. Even though it's animal food, but because the shepherds can eat from it as well, it's also considered human food. You bench the ne'efes b'Yom Tov, and you can bake it on Yom Tov. Now the obvious question is, and the awesome you can use it for Pesach for matzah. Now the obvious question is, if let's say part of it is going to the shepherds and part of it is going to the animals, why don't you just cut off the part that the shepherds will eat and bake that, and the rest don't? Just like you said now with a goy and a yid, you can separate the dough and the part that belongs to goy, leave it alone, and only use the part that belongs to yid. Say the same thing about animal, because the same pasuk lachem that says lachem v'loy lekusim, not to goyim, says lachem v'loy leklavim. So what's the difference? Why can't you just separate and only use the part that fit for the consumption of these shepherds? Says the Gemara, no. In the case of the goy, you cannot use the goy's dough. It's his dough. However, in the case of the animal, you don't have to give any part of that dough to the animals. You can use the whole thing for yourself. Give you could give the animal other food. Shiny Isis klavim. The dough of animals are different. You don't have to necessarily give them this dough. You can give them perhaps a carcass of an animal. And therefore, because you have alternatives, perhaps, or hoil, since you could give something else, therefore, we are going to say that the entire dough you can bake. Says the Gemara. So what's the basis of this logic? Even though the fact is you're not giving them an avail, because since using the logic called hoil, since, like we had, why Erev Tavshilin, since if you're allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos from the Torah, because since guests can come in the afternoon, I'm going to give it to them. So therefore, it removes the prohibition from the Torah, and so Rabbanan, and that's why you have Erev Tavshilin. The concept of Hoyel, same thing here. Since you can feed the dog other alternative foods, therefore the entire dough is shaykh to the shepherds. That's why you can bake all of it. Says the Gemara, the problem is, who's the author of this halacha? It is Rav Chizda. And what do we know about Rav Chizda? We had before, we had in Psachim. Does he really believe in the whole concept of Hoyel? He doesn't believe in it. What didn't we learn? If one bakes from Yom Tov to the weekday, Rav Chizda on Malaika, you get 39 lashes. You're not allowed to bake from Yom Tov to the weekday. And the Rabbi says, you will not get 39 lashes. And what's the basis of their argument? Rav Chizda on Malaika, because he says, I do not believe in the principle of Hoyel, since guests can arrive, it would be suitable, it's suitable now as well. I don't believe in that. And
What's
the Rabbi,
in plain English?
Hoyel means literally since. Like the word migri, since. It means that since something else can happen, we treat it as if it already happened. Since if guests come into your house on Yom Tov afternoon, you have the food ready for them to eat. So even though there are no guests planned to come and no guests show up, from the Torah's perspective, you did not really prepare from Yom Tov to a weekday, because it's quite possible you prepared for Yom Tov itself if guests would have arrived. That's the principle of Hoyel. Since if the guests will arrive, be permitted. So even though guests didn't arrive, from the Torah's perspective, it's all right. That's the view of Rabbah. Rabbi Chizda says you're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to the weekday, of course. Everyone holds that. But if you did, you will get your full 39 lashes, because I don't believe in this principle of Hoyel. The fact is you didn't prepare it for guests. No guest arrived. You committed a sin. In other words, Rab Chizda does not believe in the principle that since it could have happened, it's as if it happened. So going back to our Gemara over here, you're telling me that since you could feed the dogs other food, even though you plan to give them this dough, since you could have given the dogs other food, it's as if the entire dough is suitable for the shepherds. But the fact is you didn't prepare that, and we don't believe in principle of Hoyle. At least Rab Chizda doesn't. Rab said you don't get Malchus. Amrin, we say Hoyle, we believe in the principle of Hoyle. Says the Gemara, you're right. Rav Chizda is saying the reason why you cannot separate, why by the dogs you're allowed to bake the entire dough, and we don't say separate the part for the dogs, for the animals, is because we're talking about what you did have, not because maybe you could have had. You actually have other food sitting there on the table or on the floor for the animals, and therefore the dough is not necessarily intended for the animals, even though it could be used for that. Therefore, you can bake the entire dough. Hoyle, he says, loy tema hoyle, the efsher impossible. LSA can go in the east lane of Vela. It's a case where you have a carcass there, the vadai efsher of faisam, no hoyle, it's actually right there. And you have an option right now to give them the Vela or the dough. So therefore, because the Vela is sitting right there, you can bake the entire dough. And if afterwards you want to give some of it to the animals, you can. But right now, the entire dough is suitable for the shepherds. Saying about it further, boy, in the name of Rav Huna, we asked two dots. They asked Rav Huna a question. What about Hani b'nei Baga? What about these people who live in the city or this town? That the people live in villages, and the army, the government used to send the army around the entire country to protect them. And the law was that if you came into a village, the people of the village have a responsibility to feed them, to feed the people there. So what happens is, Hani b'nei Baga, the people of a certain village, the Ramu alayu kimcha the b'nei chelu. They have an obligation to feed flour to the army. Ma'ola fa'isa v'yantif. Can they bake it on Yom Tov? Because you're not allowed to bake, you're not allowed to do a malacha that's forbidden on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, unless it's for Yidden, not for Goyim. So what do? Amar, he said to him, Rav Huna said, Chazina, we see. We will look at it as follows. We assess. If they allow us to take one of the loaves and give it to a child, like kapti, they don't care. So at least one loaf of bread is suitable for a child, but you cannot use the dough to give it to a child because they're talking about a case, as most Rishonim say, it belongs to the army. They give you the dough and you have to prepare it. The only way that you can give a child one loaf is if you prepare the entire lot, maybe 200 loaves for the army. Therefore, it's as if you are baking for a Yid, because the only way you can give it to a child is if you bake for the army whatever they're entitled to. So therefore, it's as if you're baking it for a Yid, and that's why you're allowed to bake the entire lot. You don't know which loaf is set aside for the kid. You're allowed. And you're not allowed to say before you bake it, okay, this challah will be for the kid, because then the rest you're doing it for going. But the ilav, if they prohibit and they do not allow you to take any of the loaves of bread, then also it is forbidden. Says the Gemara. Now Rav Huna argues with Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda said before, if part of a goy, part of a yid, you're not allowed to bake the goy's part at all. Rav Huna says you could bake the goy's part. You could bake the goy's part because you're doing it also for a yid. That's how Rashi is. Others disagree with it. Says the Gemara. But Tanya, Taisus learned that this is not good Rav Huna, it's not good Rav Chizda, but like I told you before, the only way you can give it to the Jewish child is if the goyim have their challah ready as well. So you need to bake the goyim's challah to get to the Jewish challah. That's very different than a case where you have two partners and you're not allowed to bake the goy's part because you have no benefit from it. You can just separate and that's it. Says the Gemara about Tanya, we learned Ma'aseh b'Shimon HaTamani. There's an incident Shimon HaTamani Shalei Boy Amish Beis Medrash. One night he didn't come to Yeshiva b'Shachris. Beis Medrash didn't come to Beis Medrash b'Shachris. Following morning, Matzu Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba encountered and met him. Amalei Mipnei Malei Bas Amish Medrash. Where were you last night? We missed you. Amalei, you want to know what happened? Balesh's Borli. They knew the army, a whole battalion came to our town. Ubiksha Lachtev is Kol. They wanted to basically plunder everything in the city. So to pacify them or to bribe them, we shechted a cab. We fed them; they were all to their heart's content. And and we sent them off peacefully. So therefore, we saved everybody's money. And that's why I was busy last night. So basically, they cooked on Yom Tov for the army. On my lawyer, said to him, Tomani, I'm amazed. You thought you gained the fact that nobody was plundered and you saved all the Yidden's money in that town. But the law says you did a terrible Aveira. You cooked for Goyim. So your Amra Torah said, Lochem only for yourselves and not for Goyim. You're not allowed to cook for Goyim. And you did that. So what did you gain? You made some money, but you lost out spiritually because you committed an Aveira. Now the question is, who owned this food, this calf? The calf belonged to the Eden, so they wanted, they could have taken part of it off. And you just said before that if you're taking it, if you're doing it and taking it part for the Eden, it's all right. Not like Rab Chizda. Rabbi Yisrael said no, the Eden couldn't have taken part. The story was Egel Treifa had it. It was a non-kosher calf, so the Eden couldn't have had it. He did it purely for the Goyim, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba accused them of committing a terrible avera. Says the Gemara about Chazi leklavim, but still they could have used it for their animals, so therefore they were right. They were able to go ahead and cook because they can use part of it for, according to Rav Huna, if you can use part of it for yourself, it's all right. Says the Gemara, Tanoi is actually an argument of Tanoim, whether if you're allowed to for your animals or not. Now that we said before,
isn't the fact that they're protecting themselves from this from the government for them?
Say it again. Saving money does not allow you to do another.
It's not for the money; it's for the protection.
No,
they'd have to go to jail or they get punished.
Obviously not. We're not talking about Pekuach Nefesh here. They were interested in taking everybody's money. They were going to plunder, and this is how they pacified them. So Gemara has a question. Well, that there's an argument when on Yom Tov whether you're allowed to feed your animals. According to the opinion that says you're allowed to feed your animals, and they were allowed to cook it because they could have used part of it for their animals. The Tanya we learned. It says in Pasuk, even though before we learned, yesterday we learned, or before Yom Tov we learned, Lachem v'loy leklavim. Not everybody agrees to that, as we'll explain right now. Tanya we learned, this is Pasuk, Asher yeruchal nefesh u'levada yaz lachem. Whatever you can use for eating, make it for yourself. The mash nema l'chol nefesh. It says l'chol nefesh shemei ani yeful nefesh behema. Chol nefesh, any soul. Sounds like even for your animal, you're allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov. Like, where do you find the word nefesh describing an animal? Like it says, it says, nefesh behema. If you strike the nefesh of an animal, you should pay. So we find the word nefesh, soul, by an animal just as well. So maybe you're allowed to cook and do malachas for your animals on Yom Tov. Can tell you lachem v'loy leklavim, only for you, but not for your animals. Divrei Rabbi Yossi haglili. So Rabbi Yossi holds you're not allowed to feed your animals. And, however, Rabbi Akiva says, "Afilu nefesh behema b'mashra." Akiva says that you're allowed to feed your animals. You are allowed to feed your animals. So what does it mean? It says lachem to you and not what? Lachem to you and not to goy. So how do you know? We include and we exclude. So we decided to include animals according to Rabbi Akiva, but we're excluding goyim. Why? Why did you deem it fit to include animals? You're allowed to cook for animals and bake for animals on Yom Tov, according to Rabbi Akiva, but exclude goyim. Says the Gemara, Marbani is a klavim. So according to Rabbi Akiva, they're all forbidden. A goy is forbidden, animals forbidden. Rabbi Akiva permits animals. So he explains, Marbani is a klavim. You know why you include animals? It's your responsibility to take care of them. But I take out the goyim that it's not your responsibility. So basically, the Gemara is saying here that Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba was of the opinion that you're not allowed to feed your animals, and therefore, because he said you're not allowed to feed your animals, he accused the Yehuda. How did you cook for the goyim? But obviously, Shimon Hatamani was of the opinion that you're allowed to feed for your animals, and that's why they went ahead and they cooked on Yom Tov for the goyim, because, like Rav Huna said, if part of it is to go to the Eden as well, you're allowed to.
Are you allowed to cook for your dog?
No. You're not allowed to do any malacha on Yom Tov for your animals. You're allowed to give them food, but you're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to do a malacha at all.
Cooking something that's edible by humans, but you're making it for the dog.
No, you're not allowed to do any malacha for a dog. You're not allowed to cook any food for an animal or bake for an animal at all on Yom Tov. You're allowed to feed them things, or you think you cook before Yom Tov, but you're not allowed to cook anything for them on Yom Tov. Now, that's the halacha. We follow Rabbi Yossi Agluli.
Shaila is if you're allowed to have a dog, bichlal.
That's another issue altogether. But we're talking about if you have, let's say, a guide dog or a guard dog, whichever hold you're allowed to, then this is what halach is. By the way, if you want to look at the top Taisus, you'll see Taisus actually talks about who the halach is like. But more, that's what it is. We'll come back to goyim a little bit later. Says the Gemara. Sorry, two dots. Chaval made two dots. Amar by Rabbi Yosef. That's 7 lines on top. Beitza Rabbi Yosef. Ul Rabbi Yosef Haglili. Of course, Rabbi Yosef. Said lechem leklov. You're not allowed to feed your animals either. Hani sufle lechiyusa. Let's say these seeds of dates. Since it's not suitable for a person, so actually it's like muktzah. So how can you even feed them? No, forget about cooking and baking. What about even muktzah? How can food which is not suitable at all for a person, how can you give it to your animal? The Gemara says here, now you're allowed to, if food is suitable for an animal, it's not really, you're allowed to give it on Yom Tov. What exactly is the muktzah here? So Taisus explains, if food is not suitable for a human, but if it's fit for an animal, it's not muktzah at all. But here it's talking about these seeds of dates, which are very difficult to make it suitable for an animal as well. Naturally, it's not suitable for an animal. You have to do a tikkun gadol. And therefore, in midrabanon, it's like a malacha. That's Gemara's question. How can he do that for animals? It basically says, lachem lo yiklabim.
Why did you ask?
Somebody is not muted.
Why did you ask?
And he mute yourself.
You go to sleep. Ben, can you please mute your
I'm not going
mute
to
your
sleep.
computer?
I'm just going to read bed.
Okay. So further. So how can you feed it to your animal? Amalei, he said, Hoyil v'chazi lehasaka. It's not muktzah completely because you can use this for firewood on Yom Tov, and therefore, since you can use the seeds of dates for firewood, it's all right. Says Gemara, this all makes sense. But if it's dry, so then it's good. It's good for firewood. But when it's moist, what are you going to say? Amalei, he answered back, Chazu lehesek gadol. If you have a large fire. Even though it's moist, after a couple of minutes, it'll dry up and then it'll burn well. So therefore, it's not muktzah on Yom Tov because he has other uses as well. Says the Gemara Tenach, the Yom Tov, that goes all right, Yom Tov, because you need a firewood. But Shabbos, how can you feed it to your animal on Shabbos when it requires work, so it's muktzah, and you can't tell me because it's suitable for firewood, Shabbos. Says the Gemara, you're right. In that case, mital titlina lahu agav rifta. You can take your bread and put this on your bread, and since you're allowed to carry your bread, then usually you can use your bread as a medium to also transport these particular date seeds. Like Shmuel said, you can use your bread. It's not bizo eichel, it's not insulting food because bread is pretty, it wasn't as like today so soft, pretty hard, and you can put things on it and it doesn't really degrade the food.
Why wouldn't that be a basis davar isur?
Because basis davar is only before Shabbos. This is now on Shabbos, and it's bottled to the bread. Says the Gemara, "Upligi the Rabbi Shua ben Levi." This is what we said till now, or Rabbi Huna and all that is arguing with Rabbi Shua ben Levi. What do you mean is arguing with Shua ben Levi? So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, "Mezamnin es hanochri b'Shabbos." You're allowed to invite a goy. This is a very important halacha. You're allowed to invite a goy to your house on Shabbos. Now, Rav Huna said before, if one piece goes to a yid, it doesn't matter the rest if it goes to a goy. That's what Rav Huna said. Rabbi Shua was going to say, Rabbi Shua ben Levi say that on Yom Tov you have 10 people in your house and you want to invite a goy as well. You can't, even though most of the food is being made for a yid. It doesn't matter. You're not allowed to invite a goy to your house on Yom Tov. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, "Mezamnin es hanochri b'Shabbos." You're allowed to invite a goy to your house on Shabbos. But you're not permitted to invite a goy to your house on Yom Tov. So all these people ask the question, "Oh, can I invite a goy to my house by the Seder?" It has irrelevant to the Seder. It's Yom Tov, you cannot invite a goy. Why not? Gzeira, we are worried. Shema yarbe b'shviloi. You might increase the food for that person. In other words, you might make some special food and then a special food, another pot. Technically, if you're just adding to the same pot, it's not a problem. But because you might make a separate food for that person, because a chashva person, you're not allowed to. We'll come back to that soon. He said, Yaakov says, even on Shabbos, you cannot invite to go to your house, which is not the halacha. And why is that? They drink wine and they dip the bread in the wine. It's like yayin nesach. And now it's muksa, and therefore you cannot take the cup away with a yayin nesach inside.
That means you should never allow them. That means that only on Yom Tov you should never allow them to come to your place.
Yom Tov for sure. We're talking about Shabbos even. He's saying you're not allowed to because
No, but I'm saying, but why, you should never be allowed.
Why not? You just throw it out. It's on Shabbos. It's muktzah. The mom, it's not a problem. You just throw it out. But the problem is on Shabbos it becomes muktzah. Says if so, the nami. If so, then what about our wine? Our wine, we drink the wine. We dip the challah. It looks like in those days everyone used to dip the challah into wine. Now it's mias. Nobody's gonna drink it. So it's muktzah because of mias. So it's a muktzah. What's the difference of goy because of yayin netzach or a yid mias? Says the Gemara. Chazi letardi goy. No, we can feed it to the hens, to the chickens. So therefore it's not muktzah. Says the Gemara. No, they do not michos. The goy. So their wine that they dip the challah, and also you can feed to your chickens. No. Theirs became asa bahana because it is avodah zarah yayin nesach. Well, agav kosa, since the kos itself is not muktzah, so let's say that the wine there becomes secondary to the kos, and you should be able to transport even the guy's wine. You know, the cup. Take the cup and toss it out or something because it's not muktzah. The wine should be secondary to the kos itself. Mila Amar Rabbi saying metauklin, you're allowed to move kanuna, a certain kind of a vessel that you place coal inside there, agav kitme. If let's say you put ashes there before Yom Tov or before Shabbos, you put ashes there and you want to use these ashes to cover then saliva or waste or anything out in the field, you're allowed to move this keli. Why? Even though this keli is a muksig keli because it's meant to burn coal, because it's bottled secondary to the ashes, which is the main purpose. You want the ashes. And what's the problem? The problem there is not only the kanuna, the problem is that inside the ashes you also have broken pieces of wood, and broken pieces of wood are muktzah, right? And yet we're allowed to move it. So, and why? Because we say that the main thing is the afer, and everything else is secondary. So why don't you use the same logic with a cup of wine? Say that the wine is secondary to the cup. Says the Gemara, Hasam lav isuri anoninu. Over there, the problem with a few pieces of wood is not isana, it's muktzah, so we believe in the concept of secondary, it's not a problem. However, hacha ika isuri hananinu, when this guy dips his chal into the wine, he's talking about yayin nesech, this is asabano, we're much stricter with that, and therefore we don't say, it doesn't become secondary at all, and that's why he holds you shouldn't invite a guy to your house on Shabbos, but that's not the halacha. Before we finish, why don't we treat it like other muktzah? We have like a special vessel there for waste, and we say because it's so mias, you're allowed to move it away. So same thing over here, because it's mias, you're allowed to move away the guy's wine. Amalei said to him, because I'll tell you very simply why. No, if it's there already, you're allowed to move it because it's mias. But here, you're inviting the guy to create the situation. That you cannot do. Rabbi once led Marshmul with Dorash Dashan Mizamnin as Anochi b'Shabbos. You're allowed to invite a guy to your house on Shabbos. The aim Mizamnin is not invite a guy on Yom Tov. We are worried Shema Yarbe b'Shvila. You might add more for this guy, and you're not allowed. The only heter that you have to cook is because it says lachem, but not for people who don't have the mitzvah Yom Tov. If they're on mitzvah Yom Tov, then there's no suspension of the laws of Yom Tov for them. Hagoy came to the house uninvited. And the question is, can they feed the guy? They didn't invite them. They were saying to the guy as follows. If you're happy, the food that we have here will be less mutav is fine. But if you're not happy with that, you say that you want us to make something for you that we cannot do. So these are the halachas. So the halachas is as follows. You're not allowed to invite a guy to your house on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. Shabbos, you're allowed to. If a guy walks into your house on Yom Tov, uninvited, So then we say that if it's you're allowed to have him come into the house to eat, but you're not allowed to beg him to stay. Because if you beg him to stay, the Taz says, what's the difference if you invite him outside of your house or once he's in your house? It's still called inviting. If it's people who work in your house, like you have a housemaid, a cleaning woman, and you want to give them some of the food that you prepared in the house, you can, because for them, you're not going to make anything extra, anything special, because they're part of the household. It's only a stranger or a goy outside the household that you want to make an impression on, that we have a problem with, but not somebody that is inside the house or works with you. So that is basically the law regarding inviting a goy. The question that comes up today, what about in the case where there's Ava, where for example, a member in your family, or I don't know, somebody that you know is married to somebody or to a goy, and you cannot invite one without the other, and you want to invite this one because it's what do you call it, to makarv them, and then the other one gets very offended if you don't invite their spouse. That's called Ava. So then generally there are many who are lenient, but they say you're not allowed to make anything special for them. Whatever you're making, you can add more to it for the same pot, but you're not allowed to make anything, any food, a separate item for them. So that's where Ava comes in. And
So that fits in with a second or third meal on Yom Tov or something like that. But what about what happens if it's the first meal on Yom Tov? Like you're not
makes no difference.
Time to cook.
Absolutely makes no difference. No difference. Then because Shema Yarba Bishvile, we're saying maybe you will do something. It's Xera. In other words, even though you didn't do anything wrong, we are worried that you might do something wrong. So it makes no difference. Then Shulchan Aruch talks about Mechal Shabbos. And here the general rule Mechal Shabbos is that today we don't have that category Mechal Shabbos because we say that most people didn't get a proper education or a Tinuk Shenishma, they don't know any better. And therefore it's not the category of Mechal Shabbos that the law says they're treated like a goy. So you're allowed to invite, in fact, you should invite them to make them Shomer Shabbos. That's the whole idea. That's the general rule, and so on. Okay.
So how come the Gezerah isn't over Shabbos though?
Because you can't cook on Shabbos, so there's nothing you can do. Since Yom Tov you're allowed to cook, not everyone understands the difference between, it's a difference like cook another pot, or that's why we're worried on Yom Tov. Okay, let's continue. So if you ever have to invite a goy, always invite them for Shabbos rather than Yom Tov. Beishamai says, La yachem adam chami. You're not allowed to heat up hot water. L'raglo. You're not allowed to heat up hot water to wash your feet. Elim kain, unless ruin l'shtia. Beishamai hold that only things that directly benefit food that that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. But if it's not directly food, just to let's say wash your feet, you're not allowed to. Beisila says matidin. You are allowed to heat up water if you want to use to wash your feet. Obviously, you're not allowed to heat because it holds matosh, but you're not allowed to heat up water to wash your whole body because you're not allowed to wash your whole body in Yom Tov. If, however, the water was heated up prior to Yom Tov, then you're allowed to wash limb at a time. Some people want to argue that a shower is considered a limb at a time. It's not like a bath where you do the whole body in one go. That's where the machlekes of poskim is today.
Do you want me to bring coffee here? Coffee?
Reb Motel, that's a gzeira. This this halacha
No. We're talking about doing malachas now, right? Heating up water. You're only allowed to do malachas according to Shammai if it directly relates to eating, oichel nefesh.
Yeah.
According to Behil, it has to be l'tzoydech Yom Tov. It doesn't have to be for oichel nefesh, even if it's not. We had before carrying a child, carrying a lulav, even though you're not going to eat it, but it benefits you on Yom Tov.
So cleaning yourself is considered benefiting Yom Tov or not?
Yeah, cleaning your hands and feet is benefiting Yom Tov. Taking your whole body, that's enjoyable, and the dinner you're not allowed to. That's for sure. You're not allowed to do rechitz of your whole body, going for a bath. You're not allowed to. But if the water was heated before Yom Tov, right? The water is heated before Yom Tov. There's a big machlekes in halacha, but the poil in halacha shmarach. If the water was heated before Yom Tov, we say you're allowed to do one aver at a, parts of the body at a time. So then the modern sugar, some want to say that a shower is like parts at a time, because it's not like a bath that you immerse it completely. And others say you're not allowed to take a shower on Yom Tov, but it's only water that was heated up before Yom Tov. Water heated up on Yom Tov, everyone agrees you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. So if you have these water tanks that heat up, whatever it is before Yom Tov it happens, and then so in the morning it's considered heated up before Yom Tov. You're allowed to make a flame, a big fire, and warm your entire body next to it. According to the base, I'm going to say in a second who that is. This last thing we just learned in the Mishnah, making a fire to warm yourself up. Who's the author? Is it Divrei Hakoli? Even everybody, and even Beis Shammai, he says only things to do with food, but because your entire body is enjoying this, it's as if it's almost as tantamount to Eichel Nefesh. The Shani Lula Beis Shammai Ben Anos Kol Guf El Anos Eivarecha. The Shammai holds there's a difference in my entire body enjoys it. Then it becomes like Eichel Nefesh. But if you just do some limbs, it's no good. Or no, Dilma Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai holds you cannot. I don't care your entire body to warm up a party body. You can't. Toshma Beis Shammai, it says in the Bryce, Beis Shammai clearly says Layas Adam Medudav Yishcham connected Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says now make a big flame to warm up, and Beis Hillel says you're allowed to. Says Gemara further, Shloisha Dvarim, there were three things that Gamliel Machmir Ketivre Beis Shammai. There were three things that Gamliel was strict and followed Beis Shammai. Number one, Ein Toimnin es a Chamel Lechatchil BeYom Tov. If Yom Tov falls on a Friday, you're not allowed to go ahead and put up a cholent on Friday for Shabbos. We'll soon see why not. Number one. Number two, this is he follows Beis Shammai. Number two, Be'ein Zoikfin es a Meneda BeYom. You're not allowed to put together a Meneda on Yom Tov. We'll soon see what that means. And number three, the ein oifin pitin gritzen. You're not allowed to bake thick loaves of bread. Elo to kick it, only thin wafers. Three things. Gemara will explain each one. Amar Gamliel mi amazed. Gamliel says I remember my family. Loy hoya oifin pitin gritzen. The taka didn't bake the thick bread. Elo to kick it. They only baked thin bread. Right now, we're understanding thick bread requires a lot of effort, and on Yom Tov we don't want you to spend too much time in the kitchen. Amar said to him, what in the world entered your parents' mind that they were so strict with themselves? And yet interesting, when anyone asked them halacha, what they should do, they were very lenient. They were so lenient, they allowed them to bake pitin, they allowed them to bake bread, gritzin, and they allowed them charodin, which is baking directly on the coal, they allowed that as well. That's the Mishnah. Now, what are these three cases? We'll see. Hey, Chidami, what are we talking about? The first case was that you're not allowed to
Sorry,
make a challenge.
the Mishnah ends up just with a question like that?
Yeah, it's a comment. It's a comment that is strange in their personal lives. So this is a response to those people who want to say, how can, let's say, a Rav give a hechsher on food and he won't eat from his own hechsher? And the Mishnah says, I'm paskening for the masses, and this is 100% kosher. Personally, I want to be more machmir. That doesn't make me a hypocrite. And I don't want to impose my chumras on everybody else. That's exactly what the Mishnah is saying. Says the Gemara, hey chidam, what exactly is the case when you say that you're not allowed to make a cholent prepare from Friday to Shabbat? What's going on here? If he made a children, then my time to Beshameh, why is he against it? If we didn't make it a children, then my time to Beshameh, why did he permit it? What's going on here? Omer will have two answers. Omer Abuna said, I will tell you, he did not make an Eid Tavshilin. And what's the law? And here's an interesting law. If somebody did not make an Eid Tavshilin, and there's nobody else in the city that you can say that had you in mind, or it's the second time you forgot what we say, that's it. Somebody else having in mind doesn't help, like we had before. But nevertheless, they allowed you just enough to survive that Shabbos. But that's what Abuna said. And that's what we're talking about here. There was no Eid Tavshilin. So therefore, Beis Shammai says you can't do it. And Beis Hillel says that you can, the minimum amount to survive on Shabbos. What Abuna say? If somebody did not make Eid Tavshilin, we allow you one loaf of bread. The Mishnah Berurah says that if you need more than one loaf, let's say you need minimum two, we'll allow you two. We allow you to cook one food, so you shouldn't fast on Shabbos. We allow you to light one candle. That's it. So we see that the Taisha says from here you learn out that the Eid of Tavshilin is what allows you to light a candle. And that's why when we say Eid of Tavshilin, when you say that, and this will enable us to bake, to cook, and to light a candle. Because otherwise you cannot light a candle either. We also allow you to roast one piece of fish. Tanya Nami Hachi, we also learned, Mishala Hinich Ezer Shilin, if you didn't make an Ezer Shilin, Eifel Pasacha, we allow you to bake one bread, with Tang Ladiracha, you're allowed to do Hatmana of one pot, and that's what the Mishnah is saying here. You did not make Ezer Shilin. Beishamai said, that's it, no Hatmana. The Sil says, we allow you one pot. Umadlikin Loyasaneh, you're allowed to light one candle, Umechamin Loikitanech, you're allowed to boil up one pot. You're allowed to roast one fish. This ends the Gemara of the first day Yom Tov.